Charles Manson built a family from fractured souls, luring wanderers to California's Spahn Ranch with borrowed scripture and stolen songs. He orchestrated loyalty through fear, intimacy, and drugs, playing guru and prophet while reading culture like a master manipulator. His followers believed his promises of a new world because he made the old one feel unreal. The Tate and LaBianca murders transformed Manson into a symbol of cultural terror. Not mere crimes, but theatrical scripts that fed a city hungry for dark stories. During his trials, he carved a swastika on his forehead and spoke in riddles, turning the courtroom into his stage. Yet his end was mundane, dying of infection in a California hospital in late 2017. No prophecy, only paperwork. After a legal battle over his remains, a judge assigned his body to cremation. The private ceremony was stripped of ritual, witnessed by few. His ashes were scattered into California rivers, then carried to the sea. There is no grave for Charles Manson, a deliberate absence that denies pilgrimage and frustrates morbid tourism. This anti-monument leaves victims their bronze-named graves while he dissolves into water and rumor. The man who turned California into a haunted stage is now erased from the map he once manipulated, ending as mere traces on tides that forget. Jim Jones cultivated intimacy as strategy, wrapping charity around control and calling it love. From Indianapolis to San Francisco, he fused Pentecostal fervor with activist theater, binding the People's Temple through meals, healings, and constant insistence that only he could save them. Relationships orbited Jones. Marriages, families, and friendships folded into church ledgers, devotion audited through confessions and tape recorders. Behind welfare kitchens and election rallies lurked beatings, staged miracles, and rehearsed testimonies. When reporters approached, Jones offered paradise abroad. Jonestown, a socialist Eden carved from Guyanese jungle that delivered isolation, hunger, and a loudspeaker voice that never slept. The final theater arrived with a congressman's fact-finding trip, gunfire at Port Kaituma airstrip, and Jonestown's collapse into ritual death. In late 1978, hundreds drank poison from cups and syringes while mothers rocked infants and the pavilion became a morgue. Jones was found nearby with a single wound and a Bible. His body returned to the United States under federal custody, charisma reduced to paperwork. In California, he was cremated without ceremony, a secret ending for a public manipulator. His ashes were scattered in the Pacific, granted no shrine. There is no marked grave for Jim Jones, no pilgrimage site in San Francisco or Indiana. This intentional absence denies physical anchor for nostalgia or extremism, keeping memory with victims who didn't choose his ending. At Oakland's Evergreen Cemetery, a memorial names the many who died, but Jones shares no stone. He remains the uninvited ghost, his trace, riding tides toward disappearance. Vernon Wayne Howell, renamed David Koresh, gathered followers through music, scripture, and promises of revelation at Mount Carmel near Waco. He bound relationships to his interpretation of the Seven Seals, fracturing couples under doctrine while raising children amid drills and sermons. The Texas prairie became a waiting room for the apocalypse, with Koresh positioning himself as father, husband, and prophet. Federal attention grew through whispers, affidavits, and suspicious weapons purchases. In late winter 1993, a raid became gunfire, then a televised siege. After weeks of loudspeakers and negotiations, armored vehicles pressed walls and tear gas-filled rooms. Fire consumed the compound. Koresh died from a head wound as the building collapsed into coals. His remains became evidence, then legal property. In summer 1993, Koresh was buried in Tyler Memorial Park, east of Waco. The modest grave bore his birth name, not the chosen identity that filled headlines. Anonymity meant to restrain pilgrimage. At Mount Carmel, only foundations show through grass where small memorials mark the dead without elevating their leader. The irony holds. A prophet of blazing revelation rests under a quiet sky with no banner. The stone tells nothing, offering its own final judgment. Marshall Applewhite, a music teacher turned visionary, transformed companionship into cosmic mission with Bonnie Nettles. Heaven's Gate demanded uniformity, identical haircuts, clothing, vegan meals, policed by checklists. Applewhite preached bodies as vehicles and desire as maintenance errors, an engineer's gospel for souls seeking lightness. In Rancho Santa Fe's rented mansion, the group prepared for departure as Hale-Bopp Comet brightened spring skies in 1997. Members entered death through coordinated sedatives and plastic bags, with Applewhite following his own instructions. The discovery shocked a nation. 39 bodies in purple shrouds, shoes lined neatly at beds. Applewhite was cremated in California, a medical end for a metaphysical architect. No procession, church, or hymn accompanied this final transformation, only paperwork and an oven that tells no stories. His ashes received no public home. There is only absence. No headstone, chapel niche, or pilgrimage site exists. The mansion changed hands, paint erasing traces while neighbors resume ordinary life. Applewhite promised clean escape from gravity. The state delivered clean finality instead. The man who tuned devotion to a single note ends without chord or marker. His promised heavenly address vanished into ash. Lafayette Ronald Hubbard built relationships as ranks, drafting intimacy into hierarchy and calling it the bridge to total freedom. Admirers became auditors, spouses became officers of his inner navy, and friendships were commissioned into the sea organization with crisp uniforms and stricter vows. He turned ships into floating monasteries, promising clarity while demanding loyalty and remapping private lives into mission charts. Scandals followed his wake. Governments questioned finances, former members described punishments and isolation, and journalists chased a founder who preferred international waters to courthouse steps. Hubbard answered with lore and policy, rewriting challenges as suppressive acts and recording dissent as spiritual illness. In the mid-1980s winter, the story pivoted from movement to mortality. Retired to a California ranch near Creston, Hubbard withdrew into silence, running his empire through couriers and bulletins. He died in late January without a ship, podium, or crowd, only doctors, witnesses, and legal notifications. What followed was clinical and quick. His body was cremated at a California facility with no public theater, the flame reducing the commander to untraceable ash. Then came the sea. His ashes were scattered off the California coast, released to swells that don't recite creeds. The Pacific received the founder without audible salutes, denying any harbor claim to his remains. There is no grave to visit, no carved likeness. The water carries what remains, and currents forget every handful's shape. Sun Myung Moon built relationships as covenants, arranging marriages across continents and calling it restoration. With the Unification Church, he turned devotion into enterprise, fish factories, newspapers, resorts, a web where loyalty and livelihood shared ledgers. Mass weddings became a miracle and spectacle, thousands in identical attire facing a stage promising rebirth through consent and command. Controversy was persistent and loud. Governments questioned finances, parents accused indoctrination, journalists traced an empire reaching from Seoul to Washington. Moon spoke of providence unfolding through business deals and ballot boxes, of purity regained through ritual. In late summer 2012, after years of illness, Moon died in South Korea. The family gathered with the movement's elite for a final choreographed pageant of grief, dignitaries, and banners. His burial refused the ordinary. At Cheongpyeong, east of Seoul, a memorial complex rose like a guarded city. Moon was interred within a sanctuary of polished stone, a private tomb guarded by symmetry, lit by chandeliers imitating day. The mausoleum presents itself as thesis in granite. Colonnades frame valleys, reflecting pools hold sky. Pale walls present a preserved kingdom. The irony accumulates. Moon, who married masses into one body, now lies beyond gates and guards, set apart from his innumerable children. The palace keeps vigil for a promised kingdom, while the city below resumes commerce. So the founder rests inside a palace calling itself eternal, converting power into permanence through architecture. George Baker Jr., calling himself Father Divine, rewrote kinship into covenant, gathering followers into households where meatless feasts replaced hunger and strangers became family. In Harlem and suburban enclaves, he arranged marriages and celibacy with equal authority, creating a theology that blurred romance and fraternity. Followers called him God. He preached racial equality, economic dignity, and collected properties as proof of divine promise. Courts indicted Father Divine for disturbing peace and questioned finances, while newspapers photographed opulent gatherings. Critics saw authoritarian control beneath the smiles. The Peace Mission ran hotels, farms, and businesses under watchwords of abstinence and punctuality, an empire of good manners with a steel spine. In the late 1960s, Father Divine died in Pennsylvania, leaving behind Woodmont Estate in Gladwin, a limestone mansion symbolizing victory over want. He was buried on the grounds within a shrine called Mount of the House of the Lord, a landscaped rise with marble phrases announcing triumph over death. The setting is strategic. pilgrims arrive by appointment, not impulse, and the peace mission guides contemplation. Woodmont speaks of permanence, wealth baptized by gratitude, a kingdom insisting on punctual grace. The irony blooms. A prophet of egalitarian ideals rests in a Gilded Age mansion overlooking private lanes. The estate answers where he lies, with the landscape refusing modesty, a mausoleum posing as a palace. Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, later called Osho, turned relationships into laboratories, inviting followers to shed inhibitions in rust-colored robes. From Pune to Oregon's high desert, he rewrote intimacy as spiritual practice, while Ma Anand Sheela managed access and disciples offered wealth and labor. Scandal arrived with sirens and subpoenas. In Oregon, the Rajneeshi Project collided with local politics through ballot contests, immigration fraud allegations, and bacteria-tainted salad bars. When federal agents pressed back, Bhagwan fled but couldn't outrun extradition. Deportation followed, emptying the desert experiment into memory and litigation. Exile circled back to India. After touring reluctant hosts, he returned to Pune's ashram in the late 1980s. Health faltered, and the breath guiding countless meditations fell quiet. He was cremated quickly in Pune, ashes placed in a white marble samadhi within ashram grounds, a shrine inscribed as memorial for one who never was born and never died. The samadhi is geometry and trance, smooth steps descending to a chamber polished like water, designed to erase borders between museum and meditation. The irony flickers. He preached ego dissolution, yet his initials adorn a global brand. The man who mocked institutions built one of enviable durability. The marble keeps mystery. The garden keeps calm. Elizabeth Clare Prophet shaped marriage into ministry with Mark L. Prophet, training families to hear dictations from archangels. In Colorado and Montana, she organized communities into prayer vigils and drills, creating vigilance that turned affection into shared stamina. After Mark's death, she wore widowhood as mantle, carrying the Church Universal and Triumphant into its sternest season. Scandal rode alongside conviction. Broadcasts warned of global cataclysm while shelters and munitions were prepared near Yellowstone. Environmental alarms mingled with Cold War dread as the prophet's voice became a metronome for urgency. Regulatory fines and firearms violations bruised the ministry's reputation, and promised timelines softened into postponement. Time brought quieter adversity, a long illness that eroded memory and precision. In early autumn of the new century's first decade, she died at her Montana home. Her burial chose modesty. She was interred in a local cemetery near the mountains she'd claimed as citadel. The grave bears her name in calm script on carved granite. No marble temple, only trimmed grass and juniper shade. The Absaroka Range lifts like folded wings while the Yellowstone River moves beyond the fence. She keeps company with veterans, ranchers, and children, sharing a town's history rather than a palace built to outlast dissent. The irony settles like frost. A prophet who rehearsed apocalypse now lies beneath dates that begin and end without trumpet, concluded by a stone keeping perfect silence. Herbert W. Armstrong turned marriages into ministries, inviting couples to align domestic life with broadcasts reaching across American nights. With son Garner Ted and fellow ministers, he built the worldwide Church of God into a family of doctrines, tithes, and airwaves. He called himself apostle, and the title sealed every living room where his voice held authority. Controversy grew with expansion. The Plain Truth magazine promised clarity, while critics traced fear and control beneath lessons that punished dissent. At Ambassador College, Armstrong curated refined culture, pageants and etiquette beside sermons ruling dance and diet. Financial power funded flights and palatial buildings, while newspapers gathered testimonies of disillusion. Age unsettled succession. Disputes with Garner Ted fractured the dynasty, yet Herbert kept pulpit and signature until Winter closed his ledger. In mid-1980s California, illness eased breath from a life set to prophetic clocks. His interment was deliberate and serene. Armstrong was laid to rest near grounds where fountains once sang for commencements. A landscaped cemetery chosen for calm over spectacle. The grave sits in tended greenery with balanced stone, preferring dignity to thunder. Dates and name inscribed with restraint, avoiding argument. The site's language is horticultural, not imperial. This isn't a conqueror's mausoleum, but a neighbor's resting place. The contrast strikes. Architect of Media Kingdom remembered by stone belonging to any schoolteacher. The cemetery levels hierarchies, and leveling feels like wisdom. Anton Sandor Lavey turned relationships into theater, inviting lovers and friends to play roles in ritual drama that mocked piety and flattered appetite. In San Francisco, he curated a salon of misfits and celebrities at the Black House on California Street. Velvet capes, feline companions, candles, and mirrors reframing desire as sacrament. He played organ, wrote liturgies, and posed with Panther's Calm, a maestro of mood and shadow. Controversy was part of the ticket price. Lavey incorporated the Church of Satan with press releases as scripture, inviting cameras to witness rites heavy on incense, light on metaphysics. The Black Pope cultivated rumors of curses while publishing handbooks of skepticism dressed in horns, a prankster's catechism with sharp edges. In the late 1990s, Lavey died in California. Far from hot lights, he'd coaxed over every gesture. There was no public procession or funerary pageant. He was cremated with clinical efficiency, remains kept within family care, scattered according to private vows, and protected from scavenger hunts that would have followed a public grave. The Black House was sold, then demolished. The lot cleared like an erased sentence. Pilgrims now stand on sidewalk offering only asphalt and memory. Lavey, who understood how architecture seduces belief, left no architecture to seduce. The showman exits. Stage collapses before encore begins, remaining what he always preferred. An idea in circulation, not a statue in park. Bonnie Lou Nettles, a nurse with mystic's tenderness, met Marshall Applewhite in a Texas hospital and refashioned companionship into calling. She read horoscopes and scripture with equal appetite, persuading Applewhite their bond was appointed from beyond. Together they traveled recruiting seekers for Heaven's Gate, with Bonnie as the calm voice behind rhetoric, turning longing into discipline. The group rehearsed attachment with lists and pledges, gentle severity trimming the world to tasks and tapes. Nettles guarded belief's door of belief with the nurse's patience, explaining departures to worried parents and softening edges that would later be cut. In the mid-1980s, illness arrived and refused metaphors. Bonnie faced a diagnosis the group couldn't reframe into curriculum. That summer, she died in Texas, leaving Applewhite with script and vacancy. The circle gathered comfort from each other's trembling hands, not from angels. What followed was private, almost secretive. Nettles was cremated in Texas. No church service, no procession, no cemetery reception. Ashes weren't installed in public columbarium. Family kept details guarded. Today, no headstone exists that pilgrims can find. The absence was strategic, preserving privacy and preventing brittle mythology from growing in soil. The irony is precise. Nettles, whose training comforted families at bedsides, denied her followers the ritual of cemetery bench and bouquet. The missing stone became a lesson that hardened into fate, deepening the group's hunger for a doorway in the sky. Marianne McLean, born in Scotland, partnered with Robert de Grimston to create the Process Church of the Final Judgment. They refashioned marriage into ministry, intimacy, into choreography of black capes, silver crosses, and German shepherds. In London's Notting Hill and Soho, McLean rehearsed authority with hypnotic calm, guiding couples to sever old ties and bind themselves to new ritual families. The scandalous image became a national pastime. Processionals through London streets turned heads while interviews teased the alchemy of Christ and Satan. In America, the process flirted with celebrities and rumors, courting fascination while denying accusations with measured cool. McLean mastered the camera's appetite, offering mystery while maintaining denials. After schisms and divorce unwound the founding partnership, McLean retreated from headlines and reinvented the project as Best Friends Animal Sanctuary in Utah's Red Rock Country. She traded interrogations for adoption forms, replacing angels with animals in daily prayers. Relationships softened around work, rhetoric thinned to the texture of care. McLean died in the American West, releasing command to younger hands. Her burial was discreet and grounded in ordinary, interred in a modest cemetery with name engraved without flourish. No tours include directions, no pilgrimages gather at gates. Among neighbors whose lives are told in simple dates, she finds company that resists spectacle. The headstone reflects sanctuary legacy, not process past. Silence performing the final lesson better than any sermon. Luc Jouret, Belgian homeopath with soldier's posture and lecturer's charm, partnered with Joseph de Mombro to create the Order of the Solar Temple. They folded marriages into secret fraternity, initiations by candlelight, star-sewn robes, vows redirecting loyalty from family to lodge. In Swiss Alps and Quebec forests, Jouret preached renewal as if the cosmic timetable were already in motion. scandal accumulated like dry tinder. Allegations of financial manipulation, staged miracles, and apocalyptic rehearsals leaked into newspapers. A baby's death raised spiraling inquiries. The movement's promise of passage grew sharper while the suspicious world couldn't catch pace. Then fires began. In the mid-1990s autumn, Swiss chalets went to ash in orchestrated blazes. Doors locked from within, rooms arranged into tableaux with bodies beside guttering candles. Canada and France soon joined with similar pyres. Investigators found accelerants, timers, and notes framing death as transit to Sirius. Jouret was found among the dead in Switzerland, stilled by choreography he'd endorsed. Burial fragmented across borders into privacy and quiet cremations. Swiss dead were interred with municipal discretion. Quebec families chose cemeteries avoiding headlines. Jouret's final placement remained shielded by discretion following notoriety. Authorities and families resisted creating tourist routes from violent ritual. The absence of pilgrimage site denies congregation, letting mountains keep echoes and fields keep ash. Bernie Lazar Hoffman, renamed Tony Alamo, stitched marriage to ministry with Susan Alamo, building a California and Arkansas following that sang in sequins and worked in denim, a factory of faith and garments. Couples surrendered paychecks and calendars while children learned hymns and quotas. Alamo played husband, pastor, and boss, guarding his trinity with microphone and payroll. Scandal gleamed under stage lights and roared in courtrooms. Beneath celebrity conversions lay accusations of beatings, forced labor, and family exploitation. After Susan's death, rumors about visions and inheritance fed a darker second act. The brand sold jackets to rock stars while courts measured harm with affidavits. The final act replaced rhinestones with bars. Federal prosecutions advanced, victims spoke, and juries listened. In the late 2000s, Alamo was convicted and imprisoned, his empire reduced to letters and appeals. Death arrived in a federal hospital, clinical and unadorned. His burial was contested over jurisdiction and next of kin. Eventually, he was interred in Arkansas soil in a cemetery keeping many stories, with a marker avoiding flamboyance. No gilded angel or marble bust, only name and date's quiet arithmetic. The site discourages spectacle. For those who suffered under his rule, the absence of stage feels like small justice. The cemetery levels reputations with gentle geometry. Ironically, the man who preached prosperity while paying wages and promises now rests beneath earth demanding no advertisement. David Brant Berg rewrote intimacy as doctrine, turning marriages into outreach instruments while claiming paternal rights over followers' private lives. With Karen Zerby, he recast romance as obedience, reordering families into control circles. The children of God called him Moses David, sending testimonies and tithes across oceans to a leader preferring letters to rooms. The scandal rose like a retreating tide. Former members described manipulation wrapped in revelation. Investigators traced harm, traveling with literature rehearsing seduction as ministry. Courts opened files, journalists collected stories, and the group adjusted vocabulary when it became evidence. Berg answered with seaborne communiques from exile. Berg avoided subpoenas by living nomadically, villas and rentals across Europe, North Africa, and Latin America. He appeared through memos and cassettes, a ghostly patriarch scattering edicts while others carried consequences. In the mid-1990s, somewhere far from courts, Berg died privately. The body received the state's most indifferent ritual. Berg was buried privately, beyond public reach, in a country where his name never rose above whisper. No published funeral notice or service for estranged children to decide forgiveness. The grave, if marked, blended carefully. If unmarked, lived only in guardian's memory. This absence isn't accidental, but policy. The family restrained details, preventing desecration and denying rallying points, for survivors wanting somewhere for flowers and anger. Geography's blankness felt like another theft. The prophet demanding testimonies left no inscription for passersby to judge. Victor Tasho Hutef, Bulgarian immigrant with stubborn certainty, gathered followers into the shepherd's rod, later the Davidian message. He persuaded believers that the Seventh-day Adventist Church required purging, and his prophecy readings supplied the scalpel. Couples formed study circles, displacing leisure with charts and fasts. Friendships hardened into vigilant cells. Seventh-day Adventist leaders denounced Hutef as schismatic, splitting congregations along fault lines. The movement marched to Waco, bought Texas prairie land, naming it Mount Carmel, a biblical echo among mesquite and dust. There, Hutef directed a community with worship and work rules, a prophecy village with gardens, print shops, and a clock set to judgment. In mid-1950s, illness pressed Hutef's breath shallow, while authority concentrated in whispered meetings. He'd built a city for forecasts that refused visibility. In late winter, Hutef died in Texas. Voice promising imminent shaking, finally yielding to time's oldest clock. The remnant paused, then quarreled over succession. Burial chose ordinary Waco soil. Hutef was laid in a public cemetery among clipped grass and shade trees. The headstone records name and dates with restraint, feeling almost correct. Measured script surrendering rhetoric to granite. No marble colonnade or prophetic allegory, only quiet arithmetic of a life that began, argued, and ended. The irony casts a thin shadow. Hutef promised purification of a vast denomination, ending marked by a small granite rectangle needing washing after rain. The cemetery keeps everyone equal. Equality here not doctrine, but lawn. William Marion Branham gathered marriages into revival caravans, stitching intimacy to tents and microphones until households orbited his schedule. In post-war America, his healing lines wound through nights of heat and hymn, while couples clasped hands in folding chairs. He spoke softly like a neighbor, then with certainty rearranging living rooms and calendars. Scandal accompanied acclaim like shadow refusing noon. Admirers testified to cures and visions, while critics tallied missed prophecies and doctrines separating believers from churches and kin. Branham placed dates within sermons, mapped history with the weather forecaster's ease. When predictions failed, explanations multiplied. In the late 1960s, after relentless travel, Branham's car collided on a desert highway near the New Mexico line. He was taken to Amarillo, held in machines and prayers. Days later, breath-filling countless tents thinned, then vanished. Burial was arranged with intention. In Jeffersonville, Indiana, Branham was interred in Eastern Cemetery. The monument is unmistakable, limestone pyramid rising above grass, edges clean, planes catching light like sermon-made stone. Names and dates inscribed carefully. Granite lectern faces visitors as if a message might resume. Pilgrims arrive from across oceans, tapes in luggage, touching stone as if charge might pass. The irony inhabits geometry. Branham preached against denominational grandeur, yet his grave outshines neighbors. Pyramids tempting the idolatry he warned against. The stone judges and invites simultaneously, fixing movement's longing into limestone. Yulon Mitchell Jr., renamed Yahweh Ben Yahweh, braided marriage, kinship, and neighborhood into a kingdom project demanding total allegiance. In Miami, he gathered followers into an urban monastery of white robes and strict schedules where vows to the leader redefined intimacy and erased competing loyalties. Apartment complexes became compounds, storefronts became sanctuaries, and families measured devotion by labor, tithes, and public praise. Controversy arrived with sirens and affidavits. Behind real estate ventures and choreographed parades, investigators traced intimidation, arson, and violence staining the movement's white robes. Former followers described a regime of fear and reward, while prosecutors sketched portraits the movement couldn't outrun. Yahweh Ben Yahweh insisted on the divine mandate, but courtrooms demanded evidence, and evidence weighed more than myth. In early 1990s, he was convicted on federal charges and confined. A king reduced to counts and chow lines. Years in custody thinned both myth and body. Near the end of the first decade of the new century, after release under strict conditions, illness closed his ledger. He died in Florida, far from parade routes. Burial returned him to ordinary. Yahweh Ben Yahweh was interred in Florida Cemetery, a county plot amid palms and oaks where groundskeepers mow in indifferent arcs. The stone bears chosen name, dates, and little else, a restrained marker declining to sermonize. No marble crown or temple colonnade, just rows of equal graves under weather and lawn. The irony settles firmly. He declared kingdom restored and lineage exalted, yet rests in county grave collecting dew like any other. Grandeur once rehearsed now meets maintenance schedules, while soil proves fairer than any throne.